Have your peonies just finished blooming and you're not sure what to do next? Do you trim them? Do you cut them back? Do you leave them? Well, stay tuned for learning a lot more about what you can and cannot do with your peonies. Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm looking forward to talking about peonies today, even though sadly our peony season of 2026 is over. There may be a few of you that have, that rare beast of a late June blooming peony. But for the most part, the peony festivals and the peonies in our garden are done. So I wanted to talk a little bit about best practices with peonies and to tell you a little bit more about different varieties of peonies. Did you know there are 3 types of peonies? The most common and the ones that we remember from our grandmothers are what we would call the herbaceous peony. The classic, the ones that if you have a peony in your garden, chances are you have that one from the garden center, from the previous owner of your home, that type of thing. So they die back to the ground every winter. They lose their leaves and die back. And they're known for how soft and flexible, unfortunately, their stems are. So then we have to buy stakes or supports or string them up somehow because their stems don't support their flowering heads. Isn't that frustrating? So that's one of the key things that lets you know you have an herbaceous peony. They bloom late spring to early summer. They require at least 6 hours of sun, and they do not like to be planted too deep. So if you are having trouble with your peonies not performing, then those are the 2 things to look at. Has your tree kind of grown in and matured over the last few years, and so they're getting less sun? Or could they have been planted too deep? If it's a new peony to you, or you've added, let's say, because I think some cases, we inherit a beautiful peony, and then in amending our garden over the years, we add more and more soil, and you don't realize that now you're burying the eye or the root of the peony too deep. And those could be reasons. Those are both the key reasons why it may not be blooming or may not be blooming as much as it has in the past. So that's something to think about. So common herbaceous perennials, you can get them at the garden center. They range in price from $15 to $40, usually just based on the color. Some of the new funkier colors will be a little bit more. Usually it's a double bloom or it's quite a full flower. And sometimes you can get more like open, almost like a poppy type flower. And they could be, I think a bowl of beauty. They can be a little bit more expensive as well. They are very popular, and I think every garden really should have one. And I know they're a very sentimental plant. Often when I'm doing landscape renovations at homes, they are, people say, well, you can get rid of everything, but I need to keep that peony. It came from my grandmother's house or my mother's house, that type of thing. So, and some peonies can be like 100 years old. I mean, that's how long the plants have been around. And I know I did a job this spring already, and the clients had peonies from their neighbor who lived to be 100. So they really wanted to make sure that they protected those peonies because she'd had them a really long time. So that's a really cool thing about a peony. Also, I want to talk to you about the other 2 types that you may not know much about. And first of all, or you may have heard the term and not understood what it meant, and that is a tree peony. So they are native to China. They are woody shrubs, much woodier, and so they don't actually die back in the winter. They stay on woody stems, and if it's not maintained, and if you didn't know what it was and how to care for it, it can look a little messy in the garden. So because of how woody it is. Their leaves and their stems kind of remain on the plant all year. So even in the winter, you're probably not sure what to do with it. The blooms are larger and they actually bloom earlier than the herbaceous ones. So sometimes when you're not even really out in your garden yet and you were like, oh my gosh, that flower's blooming or it's almost finished and I didn't even know it was blooming because I also find that their foliage is larger. And so sometimes the foliage can hide the flower if you're not watching for it. So that's something to consider. The other thing about peonies is that they are grafted. So they're grafted with a tree peony cutting on the herbaceous root, which means they need to be planted deeper than herbaceous peonies to protect that graft. So that is how they reproduce them. And so they often are a bit more expensive, $45 to $125, depending on the variety. So I want to reiterate that. So tree peonies, which are, bigger blooming, earlier blooming, they also benefit a little bit from more dappled shade. So not full shade, but they can get, a little protection from the summer heat. They also need to be planted a little bit deeper because of that graft. So that is something to really note, that you need to, if you're spending all that money on a tree peony, that you need to have it actually 4 to 6 inches deep in the soil. Very much unlike the herbaceous, but we want to not only protect the root, but you want to protect the graft on where the plant stalk is attached to that root. So that's something to think about if you are looking at a tree peony. And I think everybody should have. I mean, I know it is more of an expensive plant, and it is a splurge, and it is spring blooming, but they really are cool. So think about adding a tree peony to your garden, and you can sometimes find them, in the off season and order it just a root and with the planting instructions. So you don't necessarily need the potted plant if you want to do your research that way. And thirdly, there is something called an Itoh, Itoh peony, often also called an intersectional peony, because they are the cross between the other two. So a herbaceous and a tree peony. They do die back to the ground like the herbaceous ones do, but their stems are strong and sturdy, so they don't require the staking that the herbaceous ones do. And they also do not like to be planted too deep. Their flowers are large, just like the tree peony, and they have a slightly longer blooming window. So, you get a little bit more of a, and I would look for, if you have a lot of peonies or a few peonies in your garden, make sure you're doing it so that you're extending the bloom season in your garden as opposed to having everything bloom at the same, 2-week period. Although I know weather really takes a factor there and we don't have as much control. They have very interesting foliage, similar to the tree peony. I find that their foliage is very interesting. And they were developed and created by Japanese, so it's a Japanese plant, a Japanese peony, created by Japanese botanist Dr. Itoh. And he focused his work primarily on the yellow blooms, but modern day breeders have tweaked those. And so the one thing about the Itoh peonies is you can get some really different colors, brilliant corals and reds and different shades of pinks and whites. So that is really interesting as far as the Itoh peonies. They also require 6 hours of sun. And like I said, they do not want to be planted too deep. And they can be pricier, so $60 to $150. So as we are just wrapping up, so the reason for this show is, one of the reasons at the end of the peony season is sometimes you can find a deal, right? So after the peonies, it's harder to sell them when they're like dead in a pot, right? Or dormant in a pot. So now is to be on the lookout for those peony deals at your local garden center or even the catalog, distribution places, plant catalogs that might be getting rid of or putting their plants on sale. So especially if you're looking for, a more expensive plant like the tree peony or the Itoh peony, keep your eye out. You may not get a pick of your color, and you may not get a pick, and you may not even know what color it's going to be. But if it is one of those two peonies and it's a good deal, then go for it. I definitely recommend going for it. A little bit about how you care for all peonies. They really do not like the best time to move them or to divide them, if that's the case, especially for the herbaceous variety, is the fall when they have gone dormant. So late fall, maybe very, very early spring if you can work the soil, but usually it's late fall. But I know that and as much as that's the rule, I move them all the time because landscape projects happen all season long, and we have to move, if we're starting a new garden or changing a garden, often we need to move a peony. So some best practices are keeping, is try to keep the root together as much as possible, digging a deeper hole. If you can do it so that you get as much soil, that's something I didn't do this last time that we were doing it, is try to take them out in a huge clump. And so you're not disturbing them as much. So that's a good tip. But you definitely need to make sure you're caring for them. If you have to put them in a pot for a few weeks while you maybe prepare to move to a new house or prepare a new garden, that type of thing, that's something that you can do. Just again, remembering not to plant the eyes or the roots too deep. You'll often see the base of the stems kind of reddish or pinkish. So those are ones that you want to see that reddish pinkish. They often, sometimes when you pay attention to that, you think, oh no, I need to plant this deeper because all of that is above the soil. No, that's okay. You do not want to plant them too deep. They don't like that means they'll have roots will be too wet, they just don't like it. So we really want to make sure you're elevated and that they're not planted and kind of smothered, really, their roots. They don't often need a lot of other babying. You can trim them back if you are moving them and waiting for them to regrow. The risk in moving them off season is that they may not bloom for a couple of years. So that is a risk that we all take in doing so. And so that is unfortunate, but it doesn't mean that the plant is dead. It just means that it's just got to get reestablished and to really take up that energy back into the new soil and into the plant in order for it to put out new growth and new blooms. So the other thing, many things in our garden, I will talk about needing fertilizing or transplant fertilizing or needing any babying, that type of thing. And peonies are not one of those things. You can protect, especially if you are transplanting it late in the season, you should maybe protect it with some mulch around the base. But again, focus on the drip line. So that is where the leaves would come out. And I know if it's cut back, you don't really know. But the key is you do not want to pile soil or mulch or anything in the crown of the plant. You want to make sure it's outside of that. So you can add some compost if you do want to feed your peony, and then also a layer of mulch, but keeping it into the ring around the base of it, not covering the crown or not doing that. So that's something that I know I'm always out there, after an install and kind of moving all that stuff away from the peonies, because it's very different than all our other plants that we want to make sure are covered and are planted deeply and are watered in deeply. So water is a key when you're transplanting it, definitely. If you are transplanting it mid-season like now, they look pretty sad, and but you need to, and there's not anything you can do about it. You can't perk them back up. They finish flowering. They need to rest for next year. So cutting back the foliage. I like to leave a few leaves just to, get extra energy with photosynthesis. So if they're not too long and straggly looking, try to leave a few leaves still exposed to the daylight. but make sure it's watered well and deeply. And again, if you want to fertilize it with a compost or something like that, to just try to enrich those roots, that is something you can try. I did some reading and also was told that you can, or discovered in that reading, that a bulb fertilizer, so they don't need a lot of nitrogen. So we don't want to do anything that has a lot of nitrogen. You want to do something that is lower, much like bulbs, because we're feeding a root. We're wanting a flower. We're not wanting tons and tons of leaf growth. So, you can consider, if you have a bulb fertilizer, that's something to consider. But the key factors are in making sure that you plant them at the proper depth, according to, whether it's herbaceous, tree peony, or an Itoh peony, and making sure it's watered in well and not covered up with the crown or anything gets in that. So the nice thing about both the tree peony and the Itoh peony is that they don't really require support. And my advice for herbaceous peony lovers is to just get that support on there early, and leave it there. Look for something that's more of a ring, not necessarily a tomato cage. I know many of us do that out of desperation, but that kind of keeps it looking in an unnatural state. So, and really invest in a proper peony cage. I'm on the lookout for a beautiful one. I've seen some British ones that are just beautifully wrought iron and interesting, but a friend and I have been trying to source some local ones that look interesting. But if you just have to get the thin metal ones from your local garden center, that's okay, because you shouldn't really see it if it's supporting the plant and it's in amongst its leaves. Then, the leaves will grow up through it and you shouldn't really see them, but it will allow them to kind of have the natural shape to them, as opposed to when you use a tomato cage, then they look like skinny, kind of odd looking things in the garden. One last tip is, now that the peony season is done, you can go ahead and deadhead the peonies. I think many people do. They don't like seeing the sad looking little things that are left. So go ahead and that lets the plant put more energy into its roots and not into, seed heads in the stems. So I know you all love peonies as much as I do. I know my recent visit to the Cut Your Own Peony farm a few weeks ago, I truly, truly loved it. And I just loved looking at those peonies and seeing how they had no support. They were out in the middle of a field. They were side by side, and they were happy. They were obviously planted at the right depth, and they were taken care of and pruned the right way so that they could be successful. And I think that's what we're all striving for in our garden. So let me know if you have any questions about your specific peony, if you have any tips and tricks that you have found, or if you found some attractive looking peony supports. I would love to hear about it. Thank you for listening and joining me down the garden path. And today was great, chatting all about peonies. Bye for now.